afternoon, good evening, Asia, good morning, Americas. So it's a pleasure for us to be here with you today. My name is Dr. Myrna Flores. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Digital Transformation in Imperial College Business School. So I'm today here with Dr. Mark Kennedy, the co-founder of the Data Science Institute, and Professor Christopher Tucci, professor in Digital Innovation and Strategy. So, welcome. Where are we now? Where are we today?
We're in the Data Science Institute, and I'm a slight stickler for not overstating things. So I'm not the co-founder, co-director. My fellow co-director, E.K. Guo, was the founder in 2014. But yeah, we're in the Data Science Institute, so welcome. It's great to have you here. And this is a place where we do the interdisciplinary mashup of kind of computing, stats, different kinds of science, social science, applied to the domains such as
digital transformation.
Such as digital transformation. Exactly.
Perfect.
So, what happens here? What activities do you perform?
Well, you know, I tell my friends who are corporate funders that it's like watching grass grow at times because it's pretty dull to watch research happen. But a lot of what happens here is research. Another thing that happens, particularly in this space here in our data observatory, where we are right now, would be presentations and teaching. But this is a facility that we designed really to help us as research teams interrogate and understand, what's going on in our data in order to be able to make discoveries and things.
Nice.
Nice. So could you please briefly introduce or describe what's data science? I'm guessing everybody would like to learn for those who have not heard it before.
Yeah, well, let me start actually with the first part of that. Is like, what is data? Because I think because a few years ago, we would have said that the stuff, for example, that's in libraries or on television or the radio, that really isn't data. The data isn't even stuff in libraries; it's stuff that's in computers somewhere. And so the big change in the last decade or two, really, is with digitization and other kinds of things. We've got data that really comes to us in both structured, like relational database type formats, and also large unstructured formats. So that's the data part. And then the science part of that is figuring out how to do the transformations on all of that turns it into something that we can get insight from and apply models to. And then also the mashup of the method side with perspectives on a domain where what you're seeing in the data starts to give you new ways of theorizing and understanding the fields that you're applying it to. So it's partly methods and it's partly applying it to some set of theory or some set of problems with some domains.
Perfect. Maybe we could have a look at a couple application areas here, and then
so let me show you, I suppose, a couple of things that would be like. Let me start with one that we often show, which is a discovery one. So this is, I think we're going to want to flip it around over here. If you look here, what you're seeing is real-time transactions in Bitcoin on the blockchain. And so what's interesting about this is there's a way of interpreting what is a transaction. So orange is coming out of a wallet, blue is going into a wallet. So here's somebody who's paying something to someone. And when you see there's a gray spline here and the language, this visual language here, that means that that's the same IP address. And you can see that these things start to take different shapes. And so this is an example of sort of starting to look at some data and say, well, why are they not the same shape? Why is this sort of modal transaction? Somebody pays, somebody maybe gets some change and it goes on to somebody else. What are the things beyond that that are starting to happen? And if we flip this around in here, Dan McGinn, who did this research back in 2015, found this in his data at one point and concluded there must be a bug, somehow in what I'm doing with my visualization algorithm. And in fact, he realized, no, that's not a bug. In my software, it's like a bug in the network. So these are essentially like denial of service attacks where you've got a fairly large number of computers involved in very small transactions in a way that boosted up massively the clearing time for the blockchain network. And at the time when this was being done, there were debates about, does blockchain scale? Can we use it to do currencies really, or is it just sort of a toy or something that's kind of for underground ne'er-do-wells? And if it starts to look like at a time when there's hype about it growing, it really doesn't scale very well, then you might conclude, yeah, that's probably not going to work. So we don't know who did this, but we're pretty sure we know why they were kind of trying to do what they did.
Yeah.
And as a result of being able to see these patterns, you could imagine, okay, when you start to see something that fits this profile, you can now say we want to exclude that type of transaction from the network. And that's what happens. So this is a good example of a kind of application where you just initially are looking at the data and then you see something that you can use and you translate that into a benefit in terms of managing something in the real world. Here's one, which is sort of a similar kind of thing, where I'll show you the network diagrams that the teams did to look at attacks on a network. So this is a cyber application. And interestingly, what you see here is this is going from outside to inside and then back out. And what we see here is that there's a point of entry that's gained, and then people fan out across a bunch of different servers inside the network so that no particular server has all of the traffic. So if what you're trying to do is back out a bunch of information in an attack, this is a way to make it sure that there's no, I suppose the analogy would be if you were at a traffic intersection and there were tons of traffic going through there, it would look very jammed up and attract attention. But if you spread out and you cover lots of different streets, then it doesn't ever quite raise the same amount of attention. So again, that was the same kind of thing of using visualization to start to say what's actually going on.
This is suspicious activity for cybersecurity.
Exactly. And
it's a way of calling your attention to something that may be operating normally under the radar without this kind of visualization.
Right, yeah. So people did find out that there were problems here, but they didn't know exactly what it was the attackers were doing. This enabled people to be much clearer about that. Let's see, maybe one more.
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
Definitely.
So very different kind of application. This is one where we got all the data from a very large national bank to say, tell us about everybody who's in each of the job classifications in the bank. And what we can see if we look over here is that these are the major organizational units of the bank. And within each one, they're ranked, by pay grade, essentially. And then we see at the start, which we had data from starting from 2012, this is the population of workers in each of these levels at that time. And then as we move across and go from year to year, we're seeing leavers, and we're also seeing new hires that come in from the prior year. So this is what's called a Sankey diagram or flow diagram. We can call this the people flow, snakes and ladders in a large bank is the subtitle here. And initially, this was just descriptive. It was just, let's do our EDA, our exploratory data analysis, and find out what's going on here. But out of this, and by the way, we're just looking at like a PNG of an elaborate, data visualization right now. So there's nothing fancy about what I'm showing you. So I'll show you something fancy in just a minute. But the interesting thing is that having done all this work and thought through how to visualize the changes across all this, we found a pattern in the change in the bank that pushed us on to think about the impact of automation from the applications of data science and AI. And that wasn't a heck of a lot going on in the data at that point, but spurred on by that, kind of as an accident, we ended up now having an active research program thinking about, can we use job descriptions? Can we mine them for the tasks that people do and be able to build a network that shows interdependencies at the level of task in an organization whereby we can also code the tasks for their amenability to productivity improvements from technology.
Nice.
So that was a kind of cool accident that happened on the way to the forum. Like now to show you something that's more dynamic, and then we'll stop doing
Yeah,
this.
it's fine.
Okay.
I can look at this all day.
This one's kind of cool. We had the data from a bunch of users of an app who had voluntarily said, "You can track me."
Okay.
All right. And then the student team that had this was done by a very impressive student team in our master's in business analytics. They tamed this data, which was second level data. You can get finer grained data than that, but second level data over 188,000 driver journeys. So it's a lot of data, but they tamed that into kind of a signature and added some things about weather, some things about road conditions, to be able to say, what can we say about 3 different applications: crash forensics, driver safety. And I want to show you the driver safety one because this is nutso. Keep in mind, these are people who said, "Please track me."
Right.
Because when you know what a great driver I am, you're going to give me a better rate on my insurance. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Okay. Now, and engineering, if you can swing over this way. So this particular person, this is a made-up name. Okay, we're not actually shaming anybody here. Okay, this person, this is what this person is doing whilst monitoring.
Wow. I can't imagine what it would have been like if it didn't have a.
You wonder.
tag.
Yeah. So my theory was that somehow he thought that he was like going to get picked up by a Hollywood agent to be a stunt driver,
Right.
for Jason Statham in his next big film or whatever it is. So at any rate, the students were able to demonstrate that from this data, which is very noisy, they could duplicate a lot of what was done with more traditional risk assessment techniques.
Yes.
In truth, this wasn't perfect, but it enabled a kind of pointing in the right direction to the things that were needed to do to clean up the data and take it to the next level. So in fact, I was just on a call yesterday with a group of bankers and insurance executives trying to figure out, what is the future of all that.
Exactly.
with this kind of data science, and it was very tricky. And we talked about pooling and personalization,
right? And
what are the principles that would allow you to sort of use this stuff in a way that creates value, but ethically.
Right.
So anyway, this sort of led to a whole bunch of questions.
Well, I think it's very cool. Actually, I've recently been talking about some success stories of AI. And one of the ones that I've noticed has been something like this for fleet owners. And so, and they have a device which is actually tracking, facial expressions, where you're looking, and cameras around the trucks, the lorries. And basically they're, alerts the driver if they're, about to crash because they're being distracted by looking at their phone, or sends back a report like, oh, this person, I see that it's 106 miles an hour. This person just went 106 miles an hour, and you need to coach them. They also say we've been able to coach them to tell them they need to drive better.
Do you know, I would have really liked to have had this when I was 19 and driving from Texas to California with a friend of mine who's actually coming from California this weekend. We're going to go see a show together. But he was driving. He fell asleep.
Oh no!
We were doing like 80.
Right.
No
one out there will know.
I woke up as we were drifting into the median, and the car was bouncing like crazy. And to his credit, he got the car back up on the road. We all did fine. We didn't get anything, but yeah, that's a serious.
It's a very
problem
interesting.
to be able to solve.
You think about it for an individual, there's a privacy implication here, but for a fleet owner and as professional drivers, it's actually a very nice AI application.
Cool.
That takes this kind of technology and does something with it that, additional.
And that's a great example too of the kind of thing that, depending on how it's done, it's either super creepy and invasive,
right,
or it's actually really helpful. So sometimes people, when they hear about the sorts of things that are possible with data and the kind of data sets that are being created, there's an understandable feeling that just feels bad or wrong. But my feeling, I don't know what you guys think, but my feeling is it depends on the extent to which people understand what they're providing,
Right.
how it's being used, and where there's transparency about when it's being used,
Yes.
and what's being done. And when those things happen, then and we have that kind of thing in non-data or non-digital sorts of agreements all the time.
Yeah, your shopping cart, your loyalty cards, typical type things. Basically getting a very small discount to give up all kinds of information about what you buy. Not even that can turn into a digital, a data set that's very, very useful for shopping. But anyway, this is a quite interesting application, and the reason I love these sort of technology adoption stories, because I like to think about digital transformation in general. And just to get out some of the terminology here, I think that people talk a lot about, because of confusion between sort of digital technologies and digital transformation.
Mhm.
And I think digital technologies are sort of building blocks of it, but digital transformation is much bigger. It goes to more of a cultural change management. And when you're thinking about a company, you really have to think about how are you going to bring all your stakeholders together with you down this path. It's not just saying I need to have a cloud service or something like that, which that you can do that, but that's like a tweaking something, and that's not really getting you in the right competitive arena to do something bigger and possibly better.
I mean, that's a super interesting one because it's very familiar to everybody. Cloud services. But if all you're doing is sort of swapping out either an outsourced data center or a wholly owned, data mining, data warehousing operation that you had, to have a different type of storage, but essentially the same activity, you're right.
Yes.
It's kind of a nothing burger.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's a cheaper line item on that one expense.
Yeah.
But where it becomes really a bigger thing in digital transformation is when you start to think about the stuff that attaches to that different way of working,
Right.
and what it gives you in the way of possibilities for the data that you're going to collect. And then you get into questions about governance, you get questions about, actually here's an opportunity that sits between two business units.
Yes.
And it involves data that nobody exactly owns the whole thing.
Right.
And it involves, let's say, an IT organization that doesn't currently, do stuff that falls between the cracks,
Right.
and there's your culture.
Right. I think
very challenging.
there's a lot of resistance. I think the point is that even on something as simple as outsourcing something to a cloud service or something, some kind of minimal adoption of off-the-shelf technology, there's still an element of employee resistance to change in general, technological change in particular, but change in general. And I think that that's one of the key issues that you have to take up when you're thinking about your digital transformation, is really, how are we going to convince everybody? Because you don't want people to be slowing you down and stopping you, because they might be afraid of being automated out of a job, for example. And I think that someone said this is a very important element in your, in your digital transformation approach, is to think about it and to attack it head on. How are employees' fears of redundancy playing into your whole plan for your company? And how are you going to address that and bring them on board so that all the stakeholders are embracing this and being proactive, rather than waiting, for everyone else in the market to adopt whatever technology it is to make you more efficient, to have them have lower costs, and then you're stuck there in a crisis mode, trying to react and trying to figure out what to do next. I think this is a big issue from an organizational point of view.
Yeah, and it's especially hard now because like we were talking earlier about data science and what is that? As it relates to digital transformation, the thing that's powerful is to say, okay, can I use the data I have from my operational systems, data that I get from elsewhere, put that together, create an asset that allows me to build a model that gives me an insight, not just so I can make the occasional big decision. That's a big deal.
Right.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
But not just that.
Right.
So that you can actually have it assisting the improvement of your operations in a way it's a new capability. So the problem for that is that there aren't vendors just selling you those applications. If there were, would you want to turn over a capability that might be a source of competitive advantage to you to sort of have it be the same as everybody else? Probably not. So you're stuck in a position where you're trying to figure out how to use these new things,
Yes.
with the cultural problems that you were just describing, to create your next generation operational platform. And that
Agreed.
that is, that's where there will be make or break stories,
Right.
but it's also very difficult.
Right. I mean, having a spreadsheet, adopting a spreadsheet or something like this, the first company that adopted a spreadsheet, I'm sure that they were doing
Investment
very well
banks
with it.
was huge. Yeah, I mean, you know, to do your due diligence and do your valuation quickly,
Sooner or later, everyone has a spreadsheet, and then then there's no advantage to that anymore. And it's the same thing with all these other digital technologies. I think it's you've got some advantage to doing something on the early side, and you need to think about what you're outsourcing, buying off the shelf, because everyone else is going to have that in a shorter period of time than it's something that you're adopting because it's special for you. It takes advantage of your capabilities, and you've kept it in house, which is then going to give you a few more years probably of lead time on it.
So I have a question. So this is one of a kind location where, besides the behind of the analytics and all the data that is happening behind, you can also help teams to align, to define a strategy. So could you share to us how organizations use this place? Because it's amazing and helps also to create and to imagine the future, right?
Yeah, so we've had a number of different visitors in this space since it opened in 2015. We've had heads of state, we've had members of the royal family, we've had a whole slew of people who are VVIP leaders in business and government. And then we have a lot of people who are just regular VIPs that I'm still trying like, can I carry your bag? And then we also have people who are famous scholars from institutions around the world that come and spend time here. And I guess the best analogy that I could think of, like why would they be coming here? It's a little bit the same reason why people go to something like a big collider or a big telescope. It's a way to look at some things that are part of your experiment, part of your research, as a group of people in a space like this, which is larger. This is a thing, I don't think we really knew this when we built the place. But when you're looking at something and then there's people around, and I look over at Chris and Chris has to look like, I kind of know what that means, or if he's laughing, I kind of have a feeling about that, right? So, which he does pleasantly a lot. So that social cue is really important, and that's one of the reasons why this place tends to be packed.
Yes, and there's also another question. I think there's a lot of work behind it, right? So we see this so interesting and live with so much data. So how much time and what type of work it requires to build one of these frames for teams and organizations come here and define a strategy, for example?
Well, I mean, part of, I guess the revolution in the inputs to digital transformation is better tools. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that's happened over the years since we built this, we just refurbished everything a year ago. For us, it's worth refreshing this. We also have another one in the other room now that's twinned to this one so that we can do two different teams looking at the same data in different locations. We're getting ready to move that out to another country in the next year. So that's all exciting. But the work of building it up, there are lots of different ways to put these facilities together, but really at the core of it is software. Mm-hmm. So we have a framework here called the Open Visualization Environment, which is an open source library that allows us now to build up the library of visualizations that we have. When we first started, we had the one that I showed you with the Bitcoin earlier. It was like, greatest hits. Okay, but isn't that back catalog at some point? It's still great. But, you can't be a radio station and only have your one track, So we had to get to the point of making that easier. And the software has been key to do.
Perfect. So, Professor Tucci, how do we link this to strategy and digital transformation? How will this help organizations move forward in this fast-moving world?
Yeah, it's a great question. digital transformation, obviously, we've been talking a little bit about it, and we think that it involves lots of different digital technology. Now, many of these have to do with AI or some kind of subset of AI and machine learning, data science for absorbing the data that you have that you might be able to use for whatever reason. I thought that was a really interesting case that we talked about earlier for the bank, because that's something that's very simple. It's not it's not in real time, but yet it's automating things, and allowing management to have some very good insights based on HR insights that they would never have, and kind of automating without sensors, right? There's no sensors involved, looking at job descriptions, looking at people mobility, and then beyond that, you've got your sensors and things like this for, your Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things, you're going to have more data, smart sensors connected to a network, and then that's going to enable you to do some more things in real time. So how I think about data science as it relates to corporate innovation, I think of it as a tool to try and come up with process improvements, efficiencies, automation. So try and think through what could you do now that could be automated? What data do you have? And we could probably talk about that for a few minutes. Where did this data come from? How do you get access to them? How do you clean them up? How do you store them and analyze them? And then how are you basically making decisions on them? And I think the very first step here is to start with the efficiency idea. How can I cut some costs here? How can I think about doing things that I always hate? Some processes that I always hated to do that were very manual intensive things. And how can I try and work on those and attack those first? And then once you've got that under your belt, to think, how can maybe we could use some techniques like this to come up with new products and services. The most obvious case is always the servitization case, where people say, oh, I'm going to bundle a service guarantee because I understand what I'm doing with my processes, delivery services, delivery guarantees, et cetera, uptime guarantees, pay by the hour, pay by the mile, these sorts of things. So that'll be the first step in trying to come up with something new for your organization, whatever it is, that's based on some element of automation, understanding data, visualization, and dashboards that will enable you to do some kind of decision making. So I feel like this is side of the progression, and that's how I relate this. I think that in general, data science is a very, very important part of your digital transformation, because in general, you're going to start digitizing things. That's just basically scanning them. This is what we talked about, at the beginning. Radio and television, and eventually those things became digitized. And then you've got to digitalize everything, which is basically, trying to figure out what to do with it and expanding it across your organization. And then, you're trying to say, okay, how can we change our culture to try and experiment and try and use some of the knowledge that we're gaining here to do something different and something that might be difficult or might give us some kind of competitive advantage. So that's my, quick reaction to sort of how companies might use, there's a lot more detail in that, but from a high level point of view, how can you think about data and innovation for your digital transformation?
Thank you. And Dr. Kennedy, what does a data scientist do? So what's the profile?
Well, in a way, related to what Chris was talking about, let me give you our sort of working definition for data science. It's the construction, exploration, and exploitation of modern data sets. Modern data sets aren't always clean, and they're not always structured, and they're often large, and they're often turning over quite quickly. Not always, but generally, are those things. So the construction is like you mentioned, how we clean up the data.
Right.
One of the things that
biggest part of the
one of the things that people, including me, wouldn't necessarily know if you're not kind of in this wonky data science world, is that for maths and statistics, we have ways of estimating what the data should be, even when they're not. So we often talk about, there's there's like a latent variable that you're trying to model the result of it, you don't actually have a good measure of it, or you have no measure of it, and you're trying to estimate it. And so rather than, I remember one day, right here, I was talking to a group of bankers, and one of them said, here's my data nirvana. Everything that's coming in is already in my shop, and it's all super clean. And I basically said, good luck. Let me know how that works.
Never.
That is like the world that has now gone by. So the challenge is to be able to integrate stuff without having an incredibly expensive time process to fix it all up. So one of the reasons why Amazon, Google, Facebook in particular are so powerful is because they have, billions of transactions coming in. And so not all of data science or digital transformation is based on machine learning, but having a closed loop thing with your data where somebody says, I'm searching for this. And then you give them a bunch of the things and they say, that's what I want. That lets you know that's what they meant when they said they were searching for that.
Yeah.
So that's a problem called query intent classification that machine learning models are used for, with some NLP. And that sort of thing is done much more easily. Really, it requires having huge amounts of data. But if you're inside a company and what's the answer and you don't have it connected to what were the inputs, you can't do that. And if you don't have a sufficient volume of that, you can't do that. So, how can you solve that paucity problem when it comes to data? And one of the ways that you can do it is by this method called data assimilation or data learning. So that's construction. Exploration, find the mystery, find the the gem, find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, see the pattern that you didn't know was there. And then exploitation. Okay, now that you found that pattern, you can say, here's why it matters. Can you build an operation around it?
Yes.
That will find it routinely, that will find it safely, that will put that in human control, that will do that in a way that's sustainable and ethical, and by the way, profitable, so that it's those three things.
Thank you. I think most of the audience is also curious to know about the skills shortage. So I'm pretty sure many organizations are struggling to catch up with all these technologies and to train their employees and to also find the next generation already with the skills they need. So what is your experience? What companies are requesting? What are they hiring new young professionals on this? What's the trend in the job market in regards to data science?
I mean, I'll start, but I'm going to turn it over to you too. So, so I'm a person who did my undergrad in computer science and AI back in the day. You can tell. And so, interestingly, AI went through a kind of a bad winter in the 1990s, where a lot of promises were made and not kept. And I would say that there is a significant risk that some of that will happen again with some parts of AI broadly. But what's happened is that whilst AI is still sometimes used in a loosey-goosey kind of way, machine learning much more tangible, data science even a bit more tangible.
Yes.
And what you see then is when you look in the job market, it is a good thing to be able to say that you're a data scientist of some stripe right now. And if you have a job which is pretty dull and you'd like to get more exciting people, you might just call it a data scientist and see if that changes your intake of CVs. So that's happening now, which is really different. And that tells me that there is about to be a big kicker of all kinds of the things that you were talking about earlier, Chris, where you're going to see companies building capabilities out of this new set of disciplines as they work through the problems of digital transformation to be able to get these different kinds of people and different skill sets blended in a functional and constructive way.
Yeah, I could just add that first off, I think there's we're actually working on an executive program here, working with some different colleagues in business analytics and in computing to make a program for people who are already in programming who want to move into data science. And I think there's a big demand for this kind of, just to follow up on your point there, think there's a big demand for that. On the other side, I would say, in terms of skill shortage, I agree. There's quite it's quite a hot job title right now because there aren't enough people doing it. But that said, I think we should also not be shouldn't go overboard completely and say, I should just hire a bunch of data, we'll just replace everybody in our organization with a bunch of data scientists. And I think and I was working with one of my colleagues, John Vito Lanzola, about this and saying, you have legacy skills. That's what you currently have expertise in your business, and you have, let's say, digital skills. And the whole idea isn't to replace the legacy skills with the digital skills, to augment the legacy skills, in a smart way. And that might mean different things for different sectors, different, industries. Some places might want to have some kind of smartification, take a product and, add some sensors to it and, think about things like that. And other times you might be, really, really trying to have a full integration of a new digital product or service with something that you have in the legacy. So I think that, I wouldn't be personally, I don't think that I wouldn't be too panicked right now. I think there's a lot of anxiety out there that's like, we're never going to be able to hire the people, and we're going to be stuck with in the Stone Age.
Mhm.
And I think that, it is something that you should be thinking about. And I think it's something that executives should be planning a little bit, but I don't think it's not a crisis yet. I think you'd want to think about, how can I integrate this in a smart way, and how can I bring in some digital skills, maybe by hiring, younger people, giving them some training, giving programmers some training, and converting people and adding them to your employee base that you already have, rather than think about how can I wholesale replace, all these people with people with digital skills.
Interesting. So having all this data and all this capacity to show information and analytics and knowledge, how can we use this room?
Well, we use it in kind of the three ways that I mentioned with the definition of data science. So we use it to figure out what data do we have, so that we are able to construct a data set that works for a problem. Then we use it to explore it, and then we use it to figure out whether what we would like to do with it practically works reliably by watching it. And so that's in what I would call roughly the kind of build something or find something. But the other couple ways that we use this space are to share findings and present them, often with other researchers, and to teach.
Perfect. Chris, any other comment before we go and see if we have some questions?
Yeah, I think let's go and have a look at the questions.
Yeah, let me go pick up the computer. So
I can see little red dots on the screen, so I assume there are some questions.
yeah.
Okay.
So may we request a sharing based on your experience on the challenges and difficulties to visualize data in the readable visual information, easy to understand, including to understand the relationship of each data?
Yes. So I have a bad news, good news story. Or bad news. Sometimes, I'll be looking at something that one of my colleagues has developed, and they're oohing and awing. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it looks like a train wreck. I don't understand. So the bad news is that you do have to sort of build up the site in a way for the type of data that you're looking at. The good news is that humans are amazingly fantastic at this. So from time immemorial, when we were walking around in the savannah, we evolved an ability to say, oh, something moved there, and I might want to eat it, or it might want to eat me. And so that is just a powerful thing that people are really, really good at. And it's amazing how quickly people can go from looking at something that they don't understand at all to something that they can really see patterns and meaning in. As an example for that, we have a course that we ran here for quite a while called Data Artistry. And we do a thing in that we call story graphing. And I highly recommend this video to you. It's Kurt Vonnegut is describing how nearly every story follows a simple graph, and it's very fun talking about this. So we show that and we talk about this, and then we say, okay, so if every story is a graph, then can you find a way from graphs to tell a story? So a lot of what we're trying to do is tell a story with data visualization. And that's one of the reasons why people are really good at it, because, you know, patterns that we don't turn into stories, I'm just saying philosophically, they don't matter. Right, yeah, exactly. So people are good at stories, people are good at seeing patterns, and that's the way out.
I think that in general, it's also the kind of the principle behind making dashboards in some sense. You know, you're trying to abstract and you have to kind of go through this whole process of starting with just a mess and trying looking for patterns and trying to understand how it could, you know, what you could do with this information, and then looking for relationships, and then trying to bring it up to a higher and higher level until finally you're able to do something with it, make some kind of decision with it. And I think that if you know, that should be in the back of your mind when you're trying to set up these sorts of things, is what do I do? What do I have here? Just descriptive, purely descriptive, and then start thinking about patterns and relationships and things like this. And then if I tweak this, what would happen over here? And then that leads you down a path of saying, okay, I think from an organizational point of view, you know, we should spend more money over on this thing or that. And that's how you can, you know, approach the idea of data visualization and dashboarding in corporate environment too.
Can I throw a little grenade into that?
Yeah.
You know, so this is interesting because the thing that you're describing, which we do call dashboard, has as its heritage the kind of dashboards that you would have seen at Chernobyl.
First of all, doesn't sound like a very good
which didn't stop it from happening. Okay?
Exactly.
So this is an interesting thing.
Right.
Like if you look at the old kind of Cold War era, you know, jet cockpits.
Yeah.
The dashboard there, extraordinarily complicated.
Right.
These days, that is not how they're built.
Yeah.
You know, so there's something betwixt and between the power of having everything that you might want to run through in a checklist.
Yes.
That is a big deal.
Right.
But then actually also having an overlay on that makes it so that where you can automate the running through the checklist, that's happening for you.
Yes.
So I think we're in
agree.
a bit of a sea change right now where we used to sort of say, you know, a dashboard is a bewildering, dizzying array of, you know, 1,000 different signals or whatever. And now that's a great dashboard. No, it's not. That's a sucky dashboard.
Right.
You know? What you
That's
want
the
is
lower level of what you need.
exactly.
You need to have the lower level, but then when you're trying to interpret, you have to abstract it up to the parts that you want to tweak.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
this is the thing.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
And I don't know, this is not happening yet, and I'm not saying it should. But the whole idea of like the dashboard, you know, may be the wrong idea for the next generation.
Yeah.
It's more like, tell me what I need to know, and then allow me to interrogate that, just in the way that you would if you were working with a senior team.
Right.
You know, and I think that probably these tools will start to morph in that direction as it becomes more possible.
Nice.
Yeah, I also think it's like an art because, as you said, you have had tons of data, lots of data, but which data and how you help others visualize it and learn about it and reflect and find the patterns. So that connection between data and making sense and design the dashboard, that's also like art.
Yeah,
I agree.
completely.
Actually, we were discussing, it takes weeks to design one of these dashboards, right? Only the interface, not the data behind.
Well, so that's a problem. And so we worked hard on that. 2 years ago, we revved the software platform that I was talking about, OEE. And we've gotten this to the place where, like, one of the visualizations that we didn't show you today, but it's a presentation that a student group did in our data science for social good summer program that we ran a few years back. And they had the data from traffic cams all over London. And they used that with some machine learning to recognize the plates on cars between intersections, so they could estimate how quickly people were driving, and particularly the start-stop. So when you see start-stop, people drive hard between two different locations and then they're sat in traffic jammed up. That's when you have bad air quality.
Right.
So they were able to put that sort of thing together, which was super impressive. It took them a long time to do that work. I think we gave them 48 hours
Wow.
to produce the visualization. And with the new tools that we had, they were able to kind of do it almost like copying and pasting the different pieces of their work onto this sort of giant canvas storyboard that we have,
Nice.
where the different pieces of it were moving parts. So we could put in there video, graphs, D3, drill downs, all
Nice.
that type of stuff.
Right.
So it's pretty cool.
That's cool.
So we have this other comment. So we need like a dynamic dashboard. Is that the future?
Yeah, it is. Actually, there was a plug out to a friend of mine, Ed Patel, and his colleagues. They ran a conference here in London right before the pandemic hit, and it was called Encode. And I personally have gotten a lot out of that community. There are a lot of artists. And what you see is that they're thinking creatively about how to do this stuff, so that people can see meaning in it much faster, and that it's dynamic. And even one of the things, we had some visitors from well, I won't say where they're from, I think I should. We had some visitors in here who were very interested in thinking about how can we do this. And I was like, yes, and wouldn't it be cool is if we walk up to this area and there's 2-3 people, then that area gets bigger and everything else gets smaller. So that we start to adapt to, those movements where their attention is. So that really is.
Yeah, that's very.
So actually we have a video, we have seen a video for the future that you can have actually screens and you just move them around, right? And you touch them.
That was the Corning. That was the Corning
Yeah, that's the
innovation
Corning.
video. Right, yeah.
So is that the
They can
future?
look it up online. Yeah.
I think that is pretty cool. The Minority Report, Tom Cruise thing, it's cool. By the way, I really want those holographic screens.
Yeah, definitely.
But when you have a large space like this, it probably doesn't make as much sense to do that type of thing. And also, it's also the reason we have not, put touch screens here. We're looking at ourselves in a monitor here. There's a camera on it. It's a very large touch screen.
Right.
But we haven't set this up in that way. So I think it depends on the use case and the application, exactly how you want to do that interaction. But it isn't to say that we don't want to sense attention, movement, gesture, affect.
Yeah.
Those are all things that would make a difference. And to me, I see, being able to create pattern that people can see out of data as kind of the base level for your visualization, being able to create story out of that, and then being able to create interactivity, particularly for a group and even potentially at multiple locations. That's sort of the next step.
Perfect. And when you have all this data and all these patterns, then you can start the prediction.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes though, and this is kind of what Chris was saying earlier, sometimes initially you just get an insight. And then when you start to understand that better, then you can put it into something that's a predictive capability that you can employ operationally, and you can put into some sort of production use with the right kind of human in the loop kind of supports and controls around it. But so it's that whole cycle, which is, that's at least the data science, not the cultural part necessarily. But I was going to say, I wonder what you think about this, Chris. My feeling is that the challenges that we've been talking about with data science, they're a subset of digital transformation.
Yeah,
they're an input into it,
Right.
but in an interesting way, because it's kind of a fractal subset. So everything that you have to do to get your data science project going is a sort of, it's the same shape, it's the same set of problems that you have when you scale it right up to the top of an organization and across the whole organization. So for that reason, I think it's kind of a cool place to look to understand the challenges, because organizations that we work with here, which are very good in their fields, struggle.
Yeah, I think if you just say, I'm hiring a data scientist, that's not going to solve. I mean, I don't know if that's going to do anything for you. Like, hey, I'm going to hire a data scientist, and now we're going to have a data strategy. It's like,
I know exactly. I totally
going to
agree.
be there.
And it even gets worse now when you hire two. I was talking to somebody recently, and we have 435 data scientists, and I'm like, so, and not that there aren't places that, would have,
for sure.
but not more isn't always better.
Right.
It's kind of like, get it to work.
Right.
And then scale up a little bit, rather than hiring just, enough people to fill the Starship Enterprise. That just basically paints a giant target on you for it.
Yeah,
until you get to the point where you're doing something about it.
There's a lot of turnover too, from employees who are hired as data scientists. If you're not ready for them, and then you don't have a challenge for them, and then they're sitting around, trying to think of what to do, and then they get an offer from someplace else, and it's a job market, so it's something to think about.
Well, I hope they're not watching, because I have friends on all sides of the story, but one of our graduates went into one of the organizations that we work with, very reputable, famous global firm, and left, and is now working for one of the tech mafia in California. And it wasn't that people weren't well intentioned or weren't right, but it's just the ability to sort of take all of that in and start to make progress with it at many employers. It does not quite equal the rate of output that the person is capable of.
Right.
And if they have an opportunity to go and apply their skills somewhere else, then it's hard to keep.
It's you have to have a challenge for these people. I mean, just think about it. So that's the point. When you say you have to think about the whole, picture for your digital transformation, that's all about it too. To have to, make a plan and to have something that they could do. That's interesting work for them.
I
That's
agree.
all.
And the only sort of, I hope this is a bit of an encouraging thing to say, is my top tip for people if you're trying to hire people is hire the best people you don't know if you can keep.
Right.
That would be a great thing to do.
Right.
Probably don't hire somebody who you're not going to keep them for a week. They won't say this, but might as well be aspirational.
Yeah, I agree.
But if you don't have the work,
Right.
So thank you so much, Dr. Kennedy, Professor Tucci. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's been great.
Now it's a little bit of vision and what we are going to do in the Center for Digital Transformation here at Imperial College Business School. So our goal will be to research the insight, gather and disseminate the latest trends, collaborating with different institutes and different experts in the campus and outside also Imperial. So we'll do a lot of insights research. Also work with organizations, understand their challenges, doing a lot of hackathons to understand how can we have them prototype, fail fast, and restart again.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
And we will also, of course, want the society to be part of this, invite organizations, governments, startups, everyone to share and learn together. So these are the key goals that we have in the center. So of course, creating this active ecosystem, bringing experts, bringing newcomers to share and learn together, building this living lab. So bring your challenge to us. Come here to the lab, come here and find data, find the trends, imagine and dream about the future. So co-create together, understand these trends, and always try to bridge the knowledge and the outputs from Imperial, from other universities to have commercial deployment. So impact society with innovations that can change the world, raise the awareness of the digital transformation. And of course, we are a university, so publish and be active, sharing our insights and knowledge in academic and white papers. So I'm excited to communicate which is our next DigiTalk. So we have David Schreier from our team, from our Center for Digital Transformation, professor of practice, and he will speak about a key topic, which is artificial intelligence ethics and the future of work. So don't miss it. It will happen the 17th of November, always at 4 o'clock UK time. I think we're good because we can have people from Asia, people from the Americas joining us. So you are all welcome. And I'm also super happy to invite you all to this hackathon that will happen here in campus after 18 months of not having interactions. So we'll have it in the Queen's Tower, 3 to 5 of December. It will be a 2.5 days hackathon again to work together on artificial intelligence and how this technology is transforming the way we work. So thank you so much. Thank you. Don't miss out our next DigiTalks. Professor Tucci, Professor, thank you. Any final words?
No, that was great. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you,
Very
Dr.
nice
Mark.
day. Yeah. Very stimulating conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.